G'day folks. As a church, we've hit the 4-year mark. And so in church on Sunday, we actually spent some time looking back over the last 4 years, trying to acknowledge some of the key things that have happened and also think into the future together. Particularly for those of you who missed that moment, I'm doing this video to show you some of those images and help you to reflect with us as we attempt to look ahead as well. So if you go back 4 years, it all began with a core group of people, and here's the first image. There's a shot of one of the first meetings of the Anchor core people, about 20 adults and about 10 kids, and that was the time to think and pray and start scribbling on the whiteboard and come up with a name for church, and that's where it all began. Since that moment, Anchor Church has met in 6, or you could say 7 different locations. Here they are. It started in Boambi East Community Centre. That's an image from our first gathering ever. Now, unfortunately, we only got to meet 6 times before COVID hit, and we needed to flick to church online, which was weird and difficult, but we needed to embrace that season like every church on the planet. And we did our own little version of attempting to connect online, and did our best during that time and had some fun during that time. And people even found us during that time, so that when we did come back to face-to-face meetings at Boambi Centre, there were some new faces. We needed to do camp chair church, bring your own chair to church, and spread out with the 4 square metre rule. We could only fit, I think, 25 to 30 people in that hall, so we had people sitting outside the doors. So soon we moved on from that venue to a bigger space where we could spread out. And so we moved to the Wesleyan building up on Bray Street. And we spent about a year there at the Wesleyan building, which was helpful for us for that season. But after a certain amount of time, we needed to move on from that space. So we moved from there to the showground in Coffs. And which was awesome and hilarious. We'd turn up, and some weeks there'd be a circus set up, other weeks there'd be a motocross festival over the weekend, and then other times the armed forces were moving through and sleeping in the hall. And anyways, we spent about 10 months at the showground, and then they needed to do some renovations on that space, and so we moved to Jetty High. And again, we spent about 10 months, or actually more like a year at Jetty High, and we launched summer days while we were there at Jetty High. That was a great space, but again, they needed to put a new roof on their building, so they moved us on, and we found ourselves at the Adventist building, which is where we still are today. And we're coming up to the 12-month mark, which is about as long as we've been in any venue, and we're grateful to have been able to be at the Adventist for those years. As well as moving locations for our gathering on Sunday, we've done baptisms in a number of different places as well. And so the first time we ever did a baptism was down there at Coffs Creek. Those of you there in the beginning might remember that first one. And actually the most recent baptism that we did was at Coffs Creek again. A larger crowd there. The other locations we've done baptisms is at the Ropes property, the Freshwater Creek baptisms. That was beautiful and great to do it in freshwater. We've been to Scott's Head for our weekend away for 3 years straight now, and we've done baptisms every time we've been there, which have just been awesome and super picturesque. We've been down to the Jetty Beach with the iconic jetty in the background there, and done some baptisms there. You name it, we've done baptisms in different places. We've met for church in different places. Here's what Anchor Kids looked like in the beginning, just a bunch of kids sitting on the floor in a lounge room surrounded by adults. And here's a little bit more what kids look like now. Now that's a picture from summer days. Kids on the run, but you get the drift. God's brought a lot more kids our way to Anchor. Here's what youth looked like back in the time, just 2 kids, cousins. And but now youth on Friday night looks a bit more like this. At the university. So much has happened in 4 years. It is quite amazing. Even though we're still young as a church, so much has gone down. One of the big changes that happened for us last year in 2023 was we moved from one 4 p.m. service to 2 gatherings, a 10 a.m. and a 5 p.m. And that was the first big change that we actually brought on ourselves. And we did it for two reasons. Number one, to make more space. And number two, to make Anchor more available. And it was quite a challenge and a stretch to make that move. But now we find ourselves in a position where for the next 4 years, we've got some space to welcome more people into the family. And from this point on, I want to talk about the future. It's one thing to look back and acknowledge what God's done, and that's just a little glimpse. It's another thing to look ahead. What is it that we're hoping for in the future? It's good to acknowledge that really a 4-year-old church is still a very young church. We're still developing. It's still early days. If you've joined more recently, you get to be part of helping shape and develop a very young work that is still being established. And so what's the plan as we head into the next 4 years? Well, we're going to continue in the way that we have, which is number one, we want to keep moving carefully and prayerfully. It's how we began Anchor, attempting to humbly, work with God and see what He had in mind. And we want to continue in this way. We want to take time to make decisions well, and we want to take time to consider each decision as we can. We want to continue also to make sure we are making disciples that love God and love each other. There's nothing fancy about our mission statement as a church. It's just what Jesus tells us to do. He gives us the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. The Great Commission is just make disciples of all the nations. The Great Commandment, love God, love each other. So there's our mission as a church that we want to continue in. We want to make disciples. And we want to do that because Jesus has told us to do it. And we want to do it because of what's happening in the Coffs area, like the situation we find ourselves in. The country we live in, I've got some stats for you here. 44% of Australians identify as Christian, which might be a surprise to you. That's the most recent census data, which is down on the census data before, so that figure is dropping, but still 44% of people identify as Christian. In the Coffs Coast area, according to my calculations or my estimates, only about 3% of the population are actually in church on any given Sunday. So that's quite small, isn't it? So though 44% of people might say they're Christian, only 3% are actually in church. And what that means is 97% are not in church, which equates to about 77,500 people not in church on any given Sunday. So this is why you plant churches. It's not because there aren't already churches existing in an area, but because there's still so many people far from God and not in church. And so this is our focus. We want to continue to actually have our eyes set on all those who are still far from God. And which is why we want to continue to attempt to be making disciples. Yep. So this is what we're going to continue with. Make disciples that love God and love each other. We want to do it in all ages and stages, as many as we can, which is really in many ways just to play on and keep giving ourselves to this work. But if I could say one thing, if we take seriously this task of making disciples of all ages and stages, as many as we can in our lifetime, it's going to take solid effort and solid focus for us. It's going to involve sacrifice. It's going to involve being clear about why we exist as a church and pressing on in that way. That's what it's taken for us to get this far. Many people very focused and sacrificing for this work. And it's what will continue to take us going forward to see more people come and follow Jesus. So we're at this point where we're looking down the barrel of, God willing, the next season and wanting to continue to see more people come to Christ. We want to go carefully and prayerfully, but we want to anticipate that God would continue to use us, to work in us and through us. And it's going to take focus and energy and effort. And so I want to put to you, at this point, as we look back over 4 years and look ahead, would you give yourself to a fresh commitment to this work at Anchor? Would you commit again or if you're new, commit for the first time to where we hope God would take us in the future and use us in the future. Would you give of your time and your energy and your finances to seeing people be brought to Christ and functioning beautifully in His church? We had our AGM on Sunday, really what's on focus there is the financial resourcing that it takes to operate as a spiritual family that's attempting to reach out and actually go after all those who are far from God. It takes finances. It takes all of our contributing and our generosity that we can, and that's what it's going to take as we go forward. If you haven't yet read the booklet from the AGM, have a look at the attachments that were here in this email, or there's an actual physical copy that you can grab from church. Read the ministry reports, read the financial reports. This is what it takes to function as the church, and it's what it's going to take in an increasing level to actually move forward and see more people won for Christ. So I put it to you, I invite you to continue to commit to this work. If God gives us the strength to do this together, we will continue to see more people worshipping Jesus like they ought to, and more glory going to God. So there you go. There's a little update. Hope that's helpful. Love you guys. I'll see you again on Sunday.